But let's still answer the main question: could Putin attack NATO? So the Wall Street Journal says that Putin could test NATO even before the war in Ukraine is over, possibly as early as this fall. Wow, what could that really mean? Let's look at it from the point of view of someone who actually lives here in Ukraine, from me here in Kyiv. First of all, this is clearly a political headline. The title is much stronger than what the article actually says. It says the US intelligence believes Putin could test NATO's resolve through a limited action, but it doesn't describe any clear scenario for how that would happen. In fact, near the end, the article also says that the chance of the most extreme scenario is considered low. So the headline is much more dramatic than the actual analysis. But let's still answer the main question: could Putin attack NATO? Before I give you my answer, let me quickly introduce myself. I'm a journalist from Ukraine. If you'd like to understand how Ukrainians see this war and what life here is really like, please subscribe to my channel. Now my answer is this. From a logical point of view, I'd say no. From Putin's point of view, I would not rule it out. Why do I say that? Because I also believe that Russia would not launch a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. It simply didn't make sense. And many of the problems people warned about back then did happen after the invasion. The only thing I got wrong was this. I thought Putin understood he was starting a long and costly war. Instead, it looks like he expected something much shorter, something that would end in just a few days. So today I don't rely only on what seems logical to me. We also have to look at the information being shared by official sources. The Wall Street Journal says it's quoting US official. That doesn't mean this scenario will happen, but it also means the possibility isn't zero, and that's important. Another thing to remember is that Putin has often relied on pressure, surprise and calculated provocations. That has been part of his strategy for many years. Many analysts believe that as time goes on, he has become more willing to take risks than he was before. And that's one reason why people continue to discuss the possibility of wider escalation. Now let's get back to the facts. The article says all of this is happening at a time when some key military supplies are running low. It's a complicated situation. Now imagine a full-scale Russian attack on NATO. What's the goal? And where would the resources come from? Let me give you one example. Even today, after years of war, Russian gas is still moving through parts of Europe because of long-term agreements. That's a reminder that even during major conflict, economic ties don't disappear overnight. That's why I don't think a direct war between Russia and NATO make economic sense for anyone. Russia is already spending huge resources on the war in Ukraine. Opening another large conflict would be an even bigger challenge. Right now, Russia is still able to keep going, partly because it has trading partners that continue buying some of its export. So from that point of view, a much bigger war would be extremely difficult to sustain. Now let's talk about another claim in the article. It says that US stockpiles of some weapons, especially Patriot Interceptor, have become smaller because of recent conflict, including even in the Middle East. Personally, I'm skeptical about the conclusion. Here is why. Imagine the United States facing a direct military conflict. Would America spend 5 years defending Washington the way Ukraine has had to defend Kyiv? Probably not. The United States has very different military capabilities and very different options. It has a much larger defense industry, a global military presence, powerful air and naval force, and many ways to respond long before a conflict reaches American cities. That's why I don't think it's accurate to compare American situation with Ukraine's. Ukraine has been fighting a defensive war on its own territory for years. The United States would face a very different kind of conflict. Of course, if we're talking about a major global confrontation involving several large powers, especially China, everything becomes much more complicated. China is a completely different challenge. But if we're talking only about Russia. I believe a direct full-scale war between Russia and the United States is still very unlikely, unless, of course, the anti-global balance changes. And this brings us to the bigger geopolitical picture. If you look at today's world, you can see that countries are gradually grouping into different blocks. One side, you have NATO and its partners. On other, you have China and countries that are becoming closer to Beijing. Right in the middle of that geopolitical line are places like Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and the Baltic region. That's where many of today's tensions are concentrated, and that's one reason why every new headline about this war gets so much attention around the world. There is another interesting point in this article. According to US official, if Putin ever decide to test NATO, one possible goal could be to create a division inside the alliance. And honestly, that's not a new idea. Russia has often tried to create disagreements inside Western alliances. But let's think about what would actually happen. Even if in the worst case scenario the United States stepped back and Europe had to deal with Russia on its own, I still don't think that automatically means Russia would win. Why? Because Russia is already under huge pressure. To fight a much bigger war, it would most likely need a much larger mobilization. And that's becoming harder. Many Russians simply don't want to fight the way people did during World War II. That's an important difference. Now think about what Europe already has. Germany has Taurus missile. Several European countries operate F-35 fighter jets. NATO has advanced surveillance aircraft, early warning system, satellites, and intelligence capabilities. Many of these are systems that Ukraine either doesn't have or has only in limited numbers. Now imagine those capabilities being used together. Europe has long-range weapons, it has strong air force, it has advanced intelligence, it has early warning system. All of that would make any military operation much more difficult for Russia. And all of this would happen while Russia is already dealing with manpower shortages and the growing cost of the war. That's why I think Putin is facing a very difficult choice: either increase mobilization even more, or eventually look for a way to end the war. According to the assessments mentioned in the article, Russia could take some kind of action anytime between this fall and 2029. That's a wide window, and it also shows that nobody is saying something like this is about to happen tomorrow. Instead, analysts are talking about possible risk over the next several years. If Putin does choose a large mobilization, that creates another problem for him. It would send a message to Russian society that what was present as quick operation has turned into something much bigger. And politically, that's not an easy message to sell. That's why, if there is ever another major escalation, I think the Kremlin would also try to build a public story around it, because every government needs public support, especially when asking society to accept greater sacrifices. That's one reason why analysts continue to watch for possible provocation or attempt to increase tension, not because they know actually what will happen, but because history showed that unexpected events can change the situation very quickly. So yes, I think this article is worth paying attention to, not because it says a war with NATO is about to happen, but because it shows what US intelligence is thinking about and what risks they are watching. And from here in Ukraine, we understand why those questions matter. We were learned the hard way that sometimes things what seems unlikely can still happen. That's why I don't like saying this could never happen. History has surprised us before. At the same time, it's important not to overreact. Right now, we are talking about possible scenario, not predictions. There's a big difference. If Russia ever decide to test NATO in some way, I believe it would most likely be through a limited action or a provocation, not a full-scale invasion of Europe, because a direct war with NATO would be an entry, a different level of conflict. And for Russia, that would come with enormous military, economic and political costs. That's why I believe the biggest risk isn't necessarily a large invasion. The bigger risk is a carefully planned incident designated to test NATO's response or create political disagreements inside the alliance. Whether that happen or not, well, we will have to wait and see, but it's one of the reasons intelligence agents continue to watch the situation so closely. So yes, I think this article raises some important questions, not because every headline is correct, but because it helps us to understand what officials are discussing behind the scene, and that's why I want to talk about it today. As always, thank you for watching. If you'd like to see this war through the eyes of someone who actually lives here in Ukraine, please subscribe to the channel. I report not only from my studio, but also from the place where the events happen. Just a few days ago, after another Russian strike on Kyiv, I went to the scene myself to show people what I really look like. My goal is simple: to help you understand what's happening here through facts, first-hand reporting and clear analysis. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.